the reality is that because of advances in their program, the difference between having a nuclear weapon and not having a nuclear weapon has got perilously close. Iran says that it doesn't want to acquire a nuclear weapon, but the fact is that its ability to do so has just leapt ahead.
Now, Iran says it's going to give nuclear talks with America a genuine chance when they get underway later. President Trump made a surprise announcement earlier this week that talks would take place in Oman, a Gulf state that has mediated between Iran and the West before. The White House says there will be all hell to pay if Iran does not agree to abandon its nuclear program. Let's speak to Simon Gass, who is the former British ambassador to Iran and a member of the Joint Intelligence Committee. Were you chair, Simon?
I was chair of the JIC, yeah.
Brilliant. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you for being with us. Tell us what, from a US perspective, they are hoping to get out of this and whether you think that is realistic.
Well, I think what the United States wants to get out of this is some assurance that Iran's nuclear program is not going to end up with Tehran possessing a nuclear weapon. What the administration has said is that that means Iran stopping its nuclear program. Some people around the administration have also spoken about controls on Iran's ballistic missiles. Sometimes they've spoken about Iran's behavior in the region, which they regard as being destabilizing. So they'll be wanting to look at all of these issues and come to a solution by which they can have that reassurance that Iran will never possess a nuclear weapon.
Do we know the scale of Iran's nuclear capability at the moment?
Yeah, we've got a pretty good take on it. What we know is that Iran, since the United States withdrew from the nuclear agreement which we negotiated in 2015, since then Iran has been pressing ahead with its nuclear program. It now has enough enriched uranium, which is the fuel stock you need for a nuclear weapon, to build more than one nuclear device. They could probably complete that process in a relatively small number of days. It would take them longer to turn that into a weapon. But the reality is that because of advances in their program, the difference between having a nuclear weapon and not having a nuclear weapon has got perilously close. Iran says that it doesn't want to acquire a nuclear weapon, but the fact is that its ability to do so has just leapt ahead.
I'm reading here that the Iranian delegation, in fact, the Iranian foreign minister, has said his country is looking to reach a fair and dignified agreement with the US. If there is enough will, we'll make a decision about the timetable of negotiations. I mean, already there seems to be a difference of opinion. The US seems to think they're having direct talks with Iran. Iran say they're going to do it through mediators. I mean, I'm just wondering that the chance of any deal being made, and then obviously the thing that's in the background here, Trump threatening all hell to pay if Iran don't make a deal, and the potential there for any military kind of action.
Well, that's exactly the problem. There is likely to be a very significant gap between what the United States wants from the negotiation and what Iran is prepared to offer, not least because the political situation in Tehran is very doubtful of the United States. Having seen them withdraw from one nuclear agreement, the level of trust is extremely low. Now, the challenge with that is that Israel regards Iran, were it to acquire a nuclear weapon, as an existential threat. It's not going to just sit around and watch that happen. And the United States itself has threatened Iran with military action if it doesn't come to a deal. So if we can't find some sort of solution, perhaps not at these talks, but in the very near future, the risks of us finding yet another conflict in the Middle East, which is going to be highly disruptive and damaging, the risk of that increases significantly.
Sobering thought. Simon, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Simon Gass, former British ambassador to Iran and former chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Tomorrow there will be negotiations between the United States and Iran in Oman. What are the president's chief goals for that, and is he satisfied with how Iran is responding to this? They don't want direct face-to-face negotiations, instead sort of old-school shuttle diplomacy where they're in separate rooms and messages are passed back and forth. So is the president comfortable with the arrangement there, and what is the chief objective?
Well, I have spoken to both the president and also his national security team who will be engaged in these discussions. These will be direct talks with the Iranians, and I want to make that very clear. I also spoke to the president just last night about his goal when it comes to Iran, and he has reiterated repeatedly to all of you publicly and also privately to his team here at the White House, his ultimate goal and the ultimate objective is to ensure that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. The president believes in diplomacy, direct talks, talking directly in the same room in order to achieve that goal. But he's made it very clear to the Iranians, and his national security team will as well, that all options are on the table, and Iran has a choice to make. You can agree to President Trump's demand, or there will be all hell to pay. And that's how the president feels. He feels very strongly about it.
If these negotiations fail, obviously the Israelis will be pushing for some kind of a military, confrontation with Iran, and I think the Americans will follow suit as well in the event that Iran refuses to cooperate in a meaningful way. And that is precisely the threat of that, which has become much more serious now. These negotiations, that is the first negotiations that are going to be held in Oman on Saturday, they will more or less be a meeting of trying to sort of assess where each party is standing. I don't think that they're going to get really into the substance of things, but obviously, at the end of the day, what the Americans want, first and foremost, is to be able to remove any threat that may come from the Iranian nuclear program. And of course, that has many shapes. That threat could be diminished in many different ways. But what the Iranians want, obviously, is for economic sanctions to be lifted, economic pressures to be reduced. So I think realistically, that is the kind of thing that they are hopeful that they will get, lifting of American pressures on them being able to sell their oil. There's 20 million barrels of Iranian oil waiting in the high seas to be sold to some customer. And if pressures increase, obviously Iranian exports will be reduced, just as they were at the end of Trump's first term in office. And so what is to be gained for them in terms of the kind of problems that they have is quite significant, even if they go back to the kind of situation that existed back in 2018. Knowing the fact that they are faced with a population that is quite unhappy about the way things are, the worsening economic situation, I think they prefer to reach an agreement. And I think that they have already decided in their mind that in the final analysis, they will be willing to give the kind of guarantees that the Americans want, that the Iranian nuclear threat is verifiably set aside for at least a number of years. Iran not being able to have missiles with 2,000-kilometer range does not prevent Iran from having missiles with 1,000-kilometer range, which means that in the event of any, you might say, war that gets out of hand, Iran could hurt Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing countries in the region if they wanted to attack their soft targets and so on, which is equally important for America in the absence of a nuclear Iran. So obviously, the Iranians don't like the Libyan model. Look what happened to Gaddafi. I mean, that's the first thing that on any Iranian's mind, of the Islamic regime. They are not going to be committing suicide. And even accepting to consider a scenario of that nature is very harmful to their, domestic constituencies. So that is out of the question. But the crux of the matter, what is it that the Israelis want in the final analysis? They want to diminish the threat of a nuclear Iran being able to pose a threat to their security and the means of delivering those nuclear weapons to targets in Israel. And that is something that can be addressed without, trying to use the Libyan model as an example.